Howdy, it's Kyle with an ode to Minnesota. Back in March, I ran a series called Geography March Madness where each of the U.S. states and Canadian provinces were put into a competition to see which one is the overall best. And there were all kinds of categories that were part of this competition to do with economics, with culture, with food, and with physical geography, and all kinds of other stuff. And so there was some luck of the draw with what categories were chosen to compare against, and there was some subjectivity because some of these were my opinion. But to win a competition like that, to go through all these different rounds, beating other states and provinces in different categories, you have to be pretty good to come out on top. So in this video, I'm going to go over why Minnesota came out on top and why it is arguably the best state in the country. If you'd like more detailed information on the state, I have a video titled Minnesota, a Geographic Profile, where I go over many more details. And it was the first state that I did in that Geographic Profile series. And I think I do the videos better now than I did at the beginning. So think of this almost like an addendum to that video in some ways. But do check that one out if you want some more info. But now let's get into why Minnesota is so great. I want to first start talking about economic indicators, because when most people talk about a place being successful, they're going to talk about money and economy first. The state has a GDP of $397 billion, which ranks it 17th in the country, but it only has a population of 5.7 million, which ranks it 22nd. That means Minnesota has a larger economy than 5 states that have more people. The GDP of Minnesota is larger than Arizona, Tennessee, Indiana, Missouri, and yes, Wisconsin. So those are 5 states with more people than Minnesota and less GDP. And that's especially bad for Arizona with 7.5 million people, and Tennessee with 7 million, with less GDP than Minnesota with 5.7 million. Other economic indicators include it has the 4th lowest poverty rate in the country at about 9%. The U.S. average is 12%. It ranks 14th in household income at about $70,000 per year. The state generates more tax revenue than it receives from the federal government, and it's what's referred to as a donor state. It subsidizes states that don't generate enough revenue. What makes the economy stronger in Minnesota than most other states is just how well diversified it is. I know I'm a broken record, but high-tech and high-tech medical jobs are the jobs of the future. The state ranks number 1 in terms of overall electromedical equipment production. This includes things like pacemakers and skin treatment laser machines. The state is home to the world-renowned Mayo Clinic, which is one of the top medical clinics in the entire world. And it's also home to United Healthcare, which is one of the largest health insurance companies in the country. So with Mayo and United and some other medical companies, the medical economy in the state is pretty large. But it's not just medical, it's also number 6 in terms of overall high-tech jobs, which includes things like computers and software development, other things that have to do with non-medical high-tech stuff. But it's not just high-tech. Minnesota ranks 5th in overall agricultural production. It ranks number 1 in oats, number 1 in sugar beets, 3rd in soybeans, 4th in corn, 6th in wheat, and 8th in dairy. And so even the agriculture is diversified with animal feed, wheat, and dairy. And the diversification of the economy also includes mining. It's the number 1 state in the country for iron ore. Now I know that the northeastern portion of the state where most of the iron mining is done is seeing some struggles in recent years, but it is still the number 1 state in the country for iron ore production. In terms of population growth, it's the fastest growing state in the Midwest after South Dakota. South Dakota only has 900,000 people. Minnesota is also the fastest growing state wholly contained within the Central Time Zone. And of all the states that have even a tiny portion of it in the Central Time Zone, only 4 are growing faster: Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and South Dakota. In terms of health, it's the 17th least obese state in the country, and it has the 3rd highest life expectancy at 81 years old. To put that in perspective, there are 18 states that have a life expectancy below 78, 10 under 77, 7 under 76, and 3 under 75. It also fares well in education statistics. In terms of college graduation rate, it ranks 10th in the country at about 37%. And there are all kinds of ways to rank public schools and overall education. So I took a look at 3 big comprehensive studies to see where Minnesota would rank. And the results were: 1 was 6th in overall public schools, 1 was 7th in overall education, and 1 was 12th in overall education. So 3 different studies looking at different indicators, but all said basically the same thing: Minnesota has pretty good schools. In terms of crime, it fares pretty well as well. It has the 6th lowest murder rate in the country, the 7th lowest firearm death rate in the country, and the 11th lowest violent crime rate in the country. And even though there's been a lot of negative things about Minneapolis in the news lately, it does have a below average crime for big cities in the U.S. And St. Paul has even lower crime. So The Twin Cities area has one of the lowest violent crime rates of all major metros in the US. But it's not just the strong economy, low crime, good health, and good education. There are other things about the state that are great that you really can't measure with stats. One, it's one of very few parts of the eastern half of the contiguous US where you can find true wilderness. And this part of the state is where you have the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, which is one of the top, if not the top, canoeing destination in the country. The scenery is gorgeous, and you can just do a couple of portage or portage and get way back into the wilderness, not have to see anybody. And in the northeastern portion of the state is where you have some mountains. They're not very high elevations, but they do look really cool, and they are pretty high elevations for the Midwest. In a general sense, the northern half of the state is mostly woods and wilderness and lakes, and the southern half is where the people live and where the agriculture is. In terms of climate, the springs are pretty nice. They can be kind of chilly, and you'll get an occasional severe thunderstorm, but overall the weather's pretty nice in the spring. In the summertime, the temperatures are really nice. It's a little humid around the lakes, but overall it's very nice temperatures and very pleasant. The fall, just like most places in the US, I think is the most beautiful time of the year. And then there's the winter. So Minnesota does have notoriously very cold winters, and it's just about the coldest part of the contiguous US. So that is going to be the biggest negative for most people. But for winter, the extremely cold temperatures are only about, say, 3 months, and there really isn't that much snow in the state with the exception of the northeastern corner. So if you live in the Twin Cities, I think they just call them the cities, but if you live there or really anywhere in the southern half of the state, you're not going to get a ton of snow, especially compared to other parts of the Midwest or the Northeast. So for most people, the winter climate is going to be the worst part about Minnesota, but if you look at the tax rates, you'll see they're really high. But one thing interesting about the tax rates in Minnesota, even though it has one of the highest state income tax rates in the country, along with an above average sales tax and above average property tax rate, I really don't get many comments from people from Minnesota complaining about the high taxes. There at least appears to be more of a you get what you pay for mentality in Minnesota because they see that things are doing better there than most other states, education, schools, health, that kind of stuff, but you do have high taxes. And not every high tax state you see the results, but in Minnesota you do. So when the biggest negatives of a state really aren't that bad, it's hard to complain that much. And of course, no place in the US or anywhere else in the world is going to be perfect, but there are some places that are doing better than others, and Minnesota is definitely one of those. So there it is, an ode to Minnesota, and I'm sure there are people watching this, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? I hate this place, but it is doing better than most other places, and there are always going to be preferences in terms of climate. Maybe you want to be on the beach type thing, but when you figure there are like 50 categories, and Minnesota is above average in 40 of them, it's doing pretty well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography. I'm talking about cities and counties and states. I'm ranking them in all kinds of categories, comparing them and this and that, and talking about cross-country road tripping. And whatever I talk about is coming from a more nerdy type perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.